Hello everyone. This video is liable to be a teeny bit out of sequence. I've done some work on the Mach-E kit without showing it on YouTube. I have the video on that work. It's going to get posted, but I know the video I'm making right now is more than long enough to be complete, so I'm just going to work on it and get it posted so I can get something up today instead of cycling through a whole bunch of old files. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about weathering. Now, again, I'm working on the Mach-E kit, and some of the parts need some detail to them that they don't currently have. One part I'm talking about is the hand. Okay, I like how it looks. Yes, I was going for this brass color, and the problem is it's just brass color. I appreciated it. Some of that is there because you can pre-shade with all clad paints, but some of it's not. I lost some of the pre-shading when I was painting that one. I didn't lose some of the pre-shading when I was painting this one. So it looks exactly how I wanted, but it could stand a little bit of detail on it. So I'm going to add a little bit of weathering to it, especially around the hose attachment point right there. I think that could use a little bit more. And it could probably use a little bit at the end, although I've cleaned that up really well recently. So let's talk about what we're doing, and I'm going to add some streaking on the back of the body. Here's the body. Okay. Yeah, I added a shield to the front of it, a chevron, a family coat of arms, and that is my family coat of arms actually. My family came from Scotland, and we have a family castle back there still. But anyhow, I'm going to add some streaking back here, and maybe underneath the arm joints here, okay? Because I think there might be a little bit of it and a tiny bit on the armor plating for the legs, so that it has some. Now, let's talk about what I'm going to use as I get all my parts out. I'm going to put a little bit of streaking on. The legs need a little of it too. What I'm going to use, you have various choices when you go to do this sort of work. And one of those choices would be, I went and got stuff and didn't get everything I need. You know, I could use some pigments. I'm not saying this is a better brand than any other pigment. I'm not supporting brands. Sometimes I do. Today I'm not. Pigments are what give paint its color in its raw form. This is finely ground. It works. I used it on the Cylon Raider. If you go find it about 1.5 years ago, works really well. Actually, last year. This stuff is good. I don't want to use it right now. Other thing I could use, and I'm going to walk over and get it, is something like this. Okay? I don't know how to use this stuff because I never have used it. That got rid of all the glare. It's funny how your hand can get rid of the glare. I've never used it. I know it's enamel based, and that's getting to something in a second. What I am going to use is some good old-fashioned oil paints. I know these guys can be expensive at times, but this one tube will last me all my life, as long as I can keep the tube sealed up properly, that is. And they don't dry out. They dry out, well, they're gone. You keep them sealed, they won't dry out. And you've got them for a very long time. So let's talk about paint and paint. Different types of paint. The basic paints we work with in a hobby are enamel, acrylic, lacquer, and oil. A lot of you don't mess with oil paints. But you do work with acrylic and enamel and occasionally lacquer paints. Okay? Let's start there. Lacquer paints. The thinner for lacquer paints usually will cut through acrylic and cut through enamel. Sometimes it won't. I mean, you mix lacquer thinner with this stuff and you get a gooey ball of a mess. Okay? It just turns that into goo. I'm not saying you can't soften it and take it off with lacquer thinner. I bet you could. I've never tried it. I just know you don't really want to mess with that. Okay, because I tried it in an airbrush once and I spent quite a bit of time cleaning that airbrush. So let's talk about what kind of paints to use. Lacquer Thinner has the hottest thinner. It will eat through a lot of things. Enamel and lacquer tend not to mix with each other. But I wouldn't try spraying a lacquer paint on top of an enamel until that enamel is 100% cured. And there's where some of the problems come in, because enamel paint can be dry to the touch but not cured. And it can take a week or two to cure up where you feel okay putting a lacquer-based paint over the top of it. So I tend to stay away from enamels. I don't like them because of the time frame they take to cure. Although most of your tester's rattle can paint is going to be enamel based. And I do have some enamel tester's paint in here somewhere. It's in a cabinet, and I'm not going to dig it out. Okay. Acrylic paint. Sometimes that's water based. To me, acrylic paint is alcohol based or it's lacquer based. It'll take either one as a thinner, and they work almost as well as each other as a thinner. I tend to use the company's own thinner because there's a little bit more to it than that, and they put a little something extra in their thinners, especially when they know you're airbrushing it, so it works better. But I have used Lacquer Thinner in airbrush Tamiya paint, and I have used alcohol in airbrush Tamiya paint. With the only problem with the alcohol is it dries really, really fast, faster than the lacquer does. And if you're not careful, it will dry on you as you're painting it, and that's a problem because you get little beads of dust all over the surface of the model, and when you brush them off, you don't get an even surface of your paint. On a flat base paint, that doesn't matter. You're going for gloss, you just screwed it up. So I'm really careful and use the proper thinners with my paints. Acrylic, though, this stuff tends to be water-based. I know people use Windex for the thinner on this, and I would use their own thinner for it. That's why I bought the Model Air. I don't have to thin that. But getting back to this, and I do use water when I brush paint, the Vallejo paints. But getting back to what I'm saying, can I put a lacquer paint over the top of an acrylic? Again, as long as the paint is cured, you should be able to do that. Sometimes lacquer paints, even when they're cured, when you spray another layer of lacquer on the top, you'll dissolve that cured layer and they'll intermix with each other. The Star Trek, the motion picture, when he did the big Enterprise there, he was encountering that because he used lacquer paints to paint the iridescent effect on the hull. And he was encountering that, where the blues were mixing with the greens and you were getting a different color, and the reds were mixing with the golds. But that's neither here nor there. So you have to watch that with lacquer paint on top of lacquer paint. But you shouldn't get much dissolving either way, as long as the paint is cured. Typically people will say you put down lacquer first, then enamel, and then acrylic. Well, let's talk about this stuff. My understanding is I bought it to see what all the fuss about this stuff was, and I still haven't used it. My understanding is this is enamel based. So what most people do is they'll put a clear acrylic coat on their model, let that cure, and then use this stuff, and then put another clear acrylic coat over it, because this stuff dries really quick. Okay? And you can get your weathering done and sealed in a day. That's all good stuff, but if you let it sit too long, and then it gets hard to clean up, because anything that's going to take this off will take that acrylic layer off, because that's enamel based. I don't like that whole approach. So what about oil paints? Pretty inert. Okay, don't let off much in the way of fumes. Linseed oil is the primary carrier. You can thin it with terpenoid. And again, I'm not saying any brand. This is just what I have on hand. Okay, it's odorless. It tells you not to breathe it. I wouldn't breathe the fumes off even acrylic paints. I wouldn't eat any paints. It's definitely not going to be good for you. But the fumes off that terpenoid are going to be way better for you than the fumes off lacquer paint, for example. So I don't worry about the terpenoid quite that much. The terpenoid doesn't eat into acrylic paint. It doesn't eat into lacquer paint. And it shouldn't eat into enamel. I've never had to eat into any enamel paint. In other words, the turpenoid and the oil paints don't interact with the other paints, and that's why I like to use them for weathering. On top of that, another good reason to use them for weathering is they can take a week to dry, to cure. So I can put my coat down, I can put my weathering down. If I don't like it, I can take a Q-tip with some turpenoid and remove it. Okay? And I like using these cosmetic Q-tips that I get in the cosmetic section when I go shopping with the wife. Okay? Because they do a good job of getting rid of those fine details, and they'll let me do what I need with that. So, I'm going to use oil paints. I know the cure time's long. I've used them repeatedly. I wish I had an example in front of me, but if one of my first videos is about Battlestar Galactica Viper, it was all done with oil paints. All the weathering was done with oil paints. Look up Victim Fu. He did a Millennium Falcon with oil paints. A series of videos on Millennium Falcon. There are others. If I can remember, I'll put some in the video description. You know, the problem is I got to remember to do it. Sometimes I don't catch it for a day or two, or if someone says, hey, where are the links? Then I go get them. Okay? So, I'm going to use oil paints. I'm going to show you my methodology for the oil paints. It's not very complex. It's not very hard. It's actually pretty simple. And one of the things I don't like when I see some weathering by some people is they way overdo the weathering. They hit it really hard. And when you hit it really hard, it doesn't look right to me. You put it under some bright lights, you wash it out some, it will. A lot of the Star Wars models were heavily weathered because they knew they were going to flood them with way more light than you would see even in daylight because of the way the cameras work. And that's why they were so heavily weathered. The Millennium Falcon comes to mind. You know, on the engine vents of the Millennium Falcon, I see solid black streaks coming down there. And if you look at the movie, what you see on the screen doesn't look that way. When you see the model in person, it looks something like that. So I understand why they're doing it. I just don't like it. So when I build a Millennium Falcon, I won't heavily streak it like that. So getting back to this, let me get started. Now, I've got most everything in reach. One of the things I did is that in my local big box hobby shop, I bought one of these. It's aluminum. I can use whatever thinner or stripper I want on it and it won't destroy it. So it's easy to keep it clean. Well, I was using this just a little while ago to brush paint. And I brush painted these rubber joints on here. They're the polycabs. I brush painted them with this. And that was a happy accident because I didn't think any paint would stick to them. It turns out that the All-Clad primer, the lacquer-based primer from All-Clad, actually sticks to that. Yeah, I painted them pretty solid with that All-Clad primer, and it stuck to it, and it didn't flip or chip when I flexed it a little bit, so I painted it up that way. Now, I don't know how durable it's going to be, so I'm not going to position this at all once it's built. I mean, I'm just going to build it, put it in the pose I want it in, and it don't move ever again. Okay? I was surprised by that. So I got my little tray here. I'm going to try to move this camera. I'm going to shut it down and try to move the camera. So we're going to have a fade here in a second. I got a tripod. It was my dad's, and my mom gave it to me recently. It's really old. The handle broke off of it just a little while ago. It's all metal except for the handle. I'm looking for the handle. I don't see it here. I'm going to try some Abe's epoxy sculpt later tonight on it and see if that will fix the handle. Another thing I've got, and this is my project for the next week or two. Well, there it is. Sorry, I keep walking away from the camera. I bet some of you have seen these. It's a vinyl Stormtrooper Head. I found it pretty cheap in a half-price sale. It was on a half-price clearance sale. So I got it, and I am going to paint it this week. I'm going to paint it something crazy. Oh, definitely vinyl. I think they meant for it to be a bank, but they didn't cut into it and put the plug into it. And they didn't cut into the head. It needs to be bathed, cleaned, and prepped for painting, and I'm going to paint it some crazy way with the airbrush. I'm going to freehand something with the airbrush. It comes with markers and stickers. I'm probably going to keep the stickers. I can probably scan those and turn them into vinyl cutouts or something. But they're not going to get put on there. Don't worry about that. And they tear up pretty good when you pull them out. Oh, those are stencils. It came with some stencils, so I might use some of the stencils. We will see. But anyhow, let me cut the camera, see if I can reposition it. Back in a sec.